From one of Australia's former leading homicide detectives, this is I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
Sallie-Anne Huckstepp.
We got more caught up in that aspect of it because we were alleged to have had her diaries in my office, and my office was then broken into. We didn't even have a safe, and in fact, when people were paying with cheques, they were stuck in a jar on the top of a filing cabinet. Well, they were all still there, but there was a precisely cut hole in our roof, and they got through the roof and through the ceiling, and clearly all our filing cabinets had been rifled.
You can't make this stuff up, Greg.
I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
Greg, I like to, like I did prepare before court, I prepare before I do podcasts, and it's in part of my investigation before I've sat down and spoken to you, that it's come to my attention there's an allegation that you've fired a .357 Magnum in Central Local Court. Now, I'm going to ask you about that. I want you to understand you're not obliged to say anything or do anything, but anything you do say or do may later be used in evidence. Do you understand that?
I do understand that, Gary.
Okay, well, I want you to choose your words very carefully and think what I'm asking you here, Greg. Have you ever fired a .357 Magnum in Central Local Court?
I have. Fortunately, it was loaded with blanks, but I have fired the gun in the presence of two. One's deceased now, so I've got to speak well of him. Two very, very. Well, they thought they were funny detectives.
I think it's pretty funny in this day and age. I definitely wouldn't think it'd be acceptable. Can you? I was reading about that, and it's written down somewhere about you firing that .357 Magnum in the courthouse or in the front of the courthouse.
No, it was
in the foyer.
It was in the foyer of Central Local Court, and anyone who's been to Central Local Court will know that you walk through you walk up the steps of this beautiful old court building. It was the original Magistrates Court, and you walk through some glass doors and further glass doors into this big area, which leads off into various courtrooms and the court office, and it was probably about 3:00 in the afternoon, and for some reason I had to go down there. It may have been to file something or to find out what was going on in the particular court that I had some interest in. And I walked in and I ran into a now deceased officer, Billy Mansell, who was a genuinely nice guy and had actually done a lot of undercover work, and it always seemed to me that he was too nice a bloke to be involved in that sort of stuff. And in any event, Billy was there with another detective who I can't recall, and when I ran into Bill, and he'd been involved in a lot of drug investigations that I'd been involved in, and I asked him what they were doing there, and they said they were hanging around waiting to give evidence, and what was the case about, and they said, it's drugs and guns, and I'd sort of then glanced to my right, and just to the left of the entrance to the courtroom, there's this great big revolver sitting on the chair, large as life.
Clint Eastwood style, .357
exactly.
Magnum.
Because they're big guns. They're big guns. And so I've walked over and I've said, "Is that a .357 Magnum?" And they said, "Yeah, have a look at it. Pick it up." Well, they were really, really friendly about it and encouraging me. And I'm not a particularly lover of guns, but I thought, well, I'm just going to want to get a feel of this thing. What they didn't tell me was that the bloody thing had a hair trigger, and that they'd put blanks in it. I've picked it up. As I was turning around to say something like, "This is bloody heavy, isn't it?" I've touched the trigger, and it's gone off in the middle of the foyer with cases going on. Well, all hell broke loose then. People started running from everywhere. And, excuse me using this language, but there's Billy and the other copper absolutely pissing themselves with laughter and having a great joke at my expense. And it took me a long time to live that down.
That is a good get. That is a very good get. But could you imagine if that happened today? The courthouse would be shut down. It'd be secured. There'd be negotiators called out. It would and everyone involved in it would be in all sorts of trouble, and people would be off on post-traumatic stress.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a different world, isn't it?
It is. We take. I think in some respects we take life too seriously.
Yeah, and like you would have seen some of the characters in the police, and some of the crooks, some of the people in the court, some of the court officers. There was a little bit more robust, and there was a lot of there was a sense of humour in there as well.
There was. It's one of my favourite, not watering holes, but lunching places. Is a Greek restaurant. I'll give them a plug called the Ethnies.
Oh yeah, I've had many a meal there,
and it's still great food. And I'd regularly see tables of detectives down there on a Friday afternoon. And as I said, you leave everything in the courtroom. It's everyone's got a job to do in this industry, and you've got to take it seriously. But you shouldn't carry it with you when you leave. Yeah, and you'd always have a laugh.
I think that's good. And I'm sure there's people that you've crossed that you don't get past that. But the people that I've dealt with, when I don't mind playing hard but fair, and I respect people that are doing their job coming at me hard but fair, and vice versa. And there's not. It's nice sometimes to, after it's finished, that you can actually, it might be just a begrudging nod, but showing respect to the person that you've been up against in an adversarial system, because you are up against them. And the way you described it in part one, it's like playing within the rules of a sporting match. Mm. Yeah. Well, it was,
and I've had the benefit on one occasion. I was in the old Courthouse Hotel after a trial. I think I was up there with Pat Costello. Pat and I had been involved in a trial up there, and we were actually having a drink with a legend detective by the name of Johnny Burke, who was as hard as nails. Yeah. But have a drink with John, and he was the nicest bloke in the world. Well, someone came up and started giving either him or me grief. Well, he went from the nicest bloke in the world to a bloke I wouldn't want to have been arrested by.
Didn't want to.
Totally different person.
Didn't want to cross.
No.
Yeah, the Courthouse Hotel. Yeah, many a victory drink spent there. Just leading into that, when you do win a case, is there? And I would imagine, and people that you genuinely don't believe are guilty, and justice would be served if they've got off. Do you go out and celebrate? And you don't have to specific examples, but is it something that's done?
Oh yeah, it is something that's done. You go and have a drink with the sort of the defendants group or the accused group, and but you don't spend a lot of time there. Yeah. I got caught once down at Albury with the Black Jubelins after winning a case there, and I was supposed to be, it was a Friday, and I was supposed to be getting home the next day to move house with my wife, and she never lets me forget this. But they got me absolutely drunk to the point where I couldn't get on the plane. They had to carry me home to someone's bed and put me on the plane the next day.
Okay, Greg, caution. I shouldn't have to. It might sound exciting going for a drink at the clubhouse, but okay, they got you.
They got me.
Okay, well, you've learnt your lesson. You've been around long enough to see King's Cross when it was that golden mile, when it was the King's Cross underworld, the underbelly. Tell us about your experiences there, because you're working in criminal law there before the Royal Commission, the Wood Royal Commission I'm talking about, the commission into police corruption that dragged a lot of people in. But you knew that world, you understood that world, and tell us about those times.
It was an interesting world, because it was the place where people went to enjoy themselves. Yeah. But it was. As I said, we go back to the Vietnam War as being, I think, the crucial element in the development of the drug culture in Australia. The American R&R boys brought drugs back, and it sort of burgeoned after that. And King's Cross was the place where everyone went. And it was just... There were so many clubs. You could go to some clubs and you could get your weed. You could go to other clubs to get your meth or your coke. Yep. And there was a little, I suppose I don't know whether I should name the person who was responsible. He's done his 15 years.
Okay.
But he was well known, and he was represented in Underbelly. But he had a little shoot where he... Yeah. It was like a little service window. You could go and get what you wanted, but it was really, really quite strange.
Yeah.
and back in the day, you had people who were in and around the cross. Remember Sweethearts Cafe? It's famous from a Jimmy Barnes song.
Yeah,
Breakfast at Sweethearts. Well, I had breakfast at Sweethearts quite a few times.
Many a time.
After going in at 4 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning to King's Cross Police Station to advise clients.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. Oh, well, we're up now. We may as well, have breakfast.
But it was interesting times, Gary. It because of the nature of the location.
Yeah,
it was just one of those places at that particular time where, from a person who didn't have to be involved in the crime, so to speak, was absolutely amazing.
Well, I think you do get, and you're fortunate, and I found that in policing, in the work that I did, you get to look in to a world that you don't want to be part of. You don't want to be fully embedded in it, but you get to see what's going on and get an understanding of it. Because you Louis Bayer, you had dealings with him. Did you act for him, or just came across?
No, I acted for Louis, and then I had cause not to want anything else to do with Louis at one stage.
Yeah,
I was, in some respects, I was naive in relation to the way I thought I handled my relationship with him. But I can say that on a number of occasions, Louis said, "I want you to come and have a Chinese lunch out at Parramatta with me." Well, I've turned up, and I'm sitting at a table with Roger.
Yeah, Roger Rogerson, the former New South Wales police officer, corrupt police officer and convicted murderer.
Lanny McPherson.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of other people who I won't
That's
name.
a good crew you've got together there, Greg.
And Laurie, and Louis.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of an education.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Well, it's not funny, but that's how you get indoctrinated into that world. Like, come and have a lunch, and then, I've spoken to that person, and then the next thing, Roger's on the phone. I want you to do a favour for me, and you can get caught up in that world, can't you?
Yeah, I never had anything to do with Roger whilst he was a detective. He was actually doing wrought iron and putting wrought iron in Goulburn jail, bars and things, which was quite strange.
Yeah, it looks. I think he was doing some other stuff too, but yeah.
And he didn't learn from his first job.
No. His last one was a classic, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, anyone who thinks they can walk around a city the size of Sydney and not be photographed 1,000 times has got another thing coming.
And look, Roger was, from a police point of view, and my early days in policing, I remember being in the witness boxes. I was in the armed hold-up squad in the 90s. Getting in the witness box, I'd never met Roger, but being cross-examined, say, "You're in the armed hold-up squad, aren't you?" I don't think it was you.
No, it wasn't me.
Okay. "You're in the armed hold-up squad, aren't you?" "Yes." And so you're the tough guys. You bash them, you load them, you do this. Roger Rogerson's your hero, and that was the narrative, because he put a stain on all of us, and not just Roger. There was other people, but that's world that you're in before the Royal Commission exposed it all, and people were accountable. It was a dangerous place to operate, wasn't it?
I never felt it was dangerous.
Right, okay.
As I said, and I've said this to others, the only person who I really thought uncomfortable with was with Nettie Smith.
Yeah, what was it about Nettie?
I just think that it was Nettie's persona, his demeanour.
Yeah.
He was sort of this brooding character, and I just felt slightly uncomfortable with him.
Yeah. Well, look, for the crimes, and he's passed away. We can talk openly, but the crimes that he was involved in, and he sounded like a grub in some of the things that he did. But he had that persona of being a gangster, but there was that other side to him.
He was psychopathical.
Yeah,
He didn't seem to have any regard for human life. Now, others may say differently.
Yeah, that I take on board. That's your impression.
But that's I was never exposed to his really, really dark side. But I just felt there was sort of this brooding presence there that was difficult.
It's interesting you identify him of all the people you've dealt with, and you've come across a wide range of let's call them villains or colourful identities. That he was one that you got that sense from.
Well, when you think of a person who I have some regard for, and that's Abo Henry.
Former gangster that used to run with Neddy Smith during the Roger Rogerson era.
Graham is the nicest bloke and the funniest bloke you'll meet.
Yeah.
And to put him in the same gang as Neddy, I think he was, or ran in that sort of circle, they're two totally different type of people.
Well, I know Graham pretty well now, and he's been on the podcast, and I've caught up with him a bit. When you say he's a nice bloke, I grew up in the same area, and he used to terrorise people.
Well, maybe
he's
changed.
Yeah, he's changed. Let's hope so. But yeah, I know what you're saying. Like you're a very personable sort of bloke. You can sit down, speak to Graham, and have a laugh, have a drink, and So
you see, there's a difference between police officers and criminal lawyers when you're dealing with the same people.
Yeah.
They have a totally different attitude to you than they do to me.
Yeah.
And so you see them from different perspectives, Gary.
Well, that's true. That's true. What you had interesting when you were dealing with Louis Bayer that he had a young driver.
That was Johnny Ibrahim.
Okay. Did you identify John as someone that was going to rise to the level he did?
No, I didn't recognise it, but having observed it over the many years, I have no doubt that he was always going to do well for himself.
Yeah.
John reads situations well, and he was. I think he found himself in the right place at the right time with the right skills to be able to gain from his good luck.
Yeah. Well, he's where he's at now, he's managed his way through, so he must have something going for him. Yeah,
he sort of that old expression about laying down with dogs and getting up with fleas is relevant to all of us. But John's been able to deal with that aspect of his life in a reasonable sort of way, so that he's come out relatively unscathed.
Charlie Staunton, you would have had dealings with Charlie Staunton, Greg. He was a former New South Wales police officer, and he got into some trouble, ended up leaving the police. I think he became a private investigator and did a bit of wheeling and dealing around King's Cross. I'm looking at all the people we've had on the podcast, but that's what happens when you've been going for a few years. But with Charlie, he former police officer, got into trouble and then lived a life. And I've had him on the podcast, and I've got to say, if Charlie didn't exist, you'd have to invent him. Like the way he's lived his life.
One of Will's lovable rogues.
Yeah. What's your take on Charlie? Because I had to laugh at some of the things he got up to.
Oh, he's got up to so much. One book's not enough for Charlie in terms of what he's been through. But Charlie is a rogue to start with, and we all love him. We don't always want to see him because he's going to put the pinch on us. Yeah. But when he comes, you can always have a laugh, and you always know what you're getting with Charlie. He's pretty upfront.
Yeah, I found that with him in my dealings with him, and I've caught up with him and bumped into him at certain places, and he's a character. And like, we're not condoning crime. We've sit here. Yeah. We'll put that out there on things, but back in those days, there were larger-than-life characters, weren't they? And I don't know. And you mentioned in part one, and I reflected on it during the break about the way the gangsters go about their business now, and it's look at me type attitude. It has changed, hasn't it?
Well, everyone wants to know what you're doing, starting off with what you had at the last restaurant you were at, to who you're laying by the swimming pool with now, and who you're killing.
Don't you take photos of your breakfast each morning and post it to everyone?
Well, it's going to be the same every morning, I'm afraid.
But yeah, I know what you're saying. Interesting. If we're talking, the way things change, is it harder to be a crook now than it would be, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, with all the technology that's changed? Do you think it's harder? Certainly harder.
But if you're a switched-on crook and you know how to run under the radar, I think that you are likely to last a lot longer than these guys who have no regard for the fact that everything we do in public is scrutinised either by virtue of public cameras or private cameras. Everyone's running around with a camera to take photos of you these days. The likelihood of your telephone calls being monitored is real. So if you're going to do anything, you better do it face to face, because telephones aren't safe, and people don't wake up to that. It keeps me in business.
Yeah, I think you've got a phone on you, like just the tracking, the ability, and I look at from an investigative point of view. If there was a murder, pre-mobile phone days, it was you'd check who you phoned on your landline, what public phones were in the area, fingerprints. Look at the technology available now. CC, like we could track you from the time you left your office in the city to come here, and your movements and basically everything you've done. It makes it so much harder, I think.
I'm involved in a murder case at the moment. My client, I think, will be. I think I've negotiated him out of that aspect of the case, or his accessorial involvement in the case. But when you looked at the evidence, the police were able to track the vehicle that the shooters, or the assassins, if I can call them that, used, from the time it was stolen till the time it was burnt.
Right.
And in relation to my client, who was involved in picking them up, exactly where his vehicle went as well, because you can't drive around anything that's you'd regard as a main arterial road, or any arterial road, without being photographed.
Yeah. That's the reality of it, isn't it? What talking about technology, Anom, the telephone, and I understand that there's some appeals going through court or currently, so if you can't talk too much about it, but just your take on that. Are you involved in that at all?
I am involved in that from three different aspects. I've got an appeal currently running in relation to a couple of clients who pleaded guilty and got rewarded for what we call facilitating the course of justice, but that's under appeal by the Crown as to the inadequacy of the penalties. I'm of opinion that if you want to get people to plead guilty, you've got to show them that it's going to be worthwhile, because at the end of the day, they get locked up. It costs $150,000 per prisoner to keep them in jail, and in some respects they don't come out any better than what they went in. So you've got to change the system in that regard. I'm involved with others who are waiting on the outcome of the High Court appeal, and it's a very interesting aspect. Because
sorry, and I probably should have, because you and I know what we're talking about, but that was the sting operation that started in America, but also used in law enforcement over here.
It's Operation Ironside.
Yeah,
and so for people who didn't know, the creator or the person who organised the creation of what we called the Phantom Secure phones, which was one of the encrypted phones that was used some time ago. He was arrested by the police and charged with racketeering offences, which are their conspiracy offences, in relation to providing telephones to the Sinaloa cartel. So by doing that, he was facilitating their ability to communicate large drug trafficking enterprises. And he was threatened with 30 years in jail and was given the option of doing the 30 years or assisting the police in getting a lesser sentence. Well, he took the latter, and whilst that was in train, he got one of his technicians at the request of the police to put together the Anom platform.
And people involved in criminal enterprise. Well, I won't say that as a defence solicitor. I object, Your Honour. Yeah, Greg, it's a podcast. Loosen up. But that they were passed out to people that may or may not have been involved in criminal activities, and the police were monitoring the calls on phones, that the people that had them felt they were encrypted and safe, that there's no way that law enforcement could monitor what was going on. Is that?
Well, the way that it worked was that, like you or I would send a text.
Yep.
And I was intending it to go from me to you. I would type in the text. That text would then be copied within the platform, and when the texter pressed send, the copy would immediately go through a system called iBots, to the police who were monitoring it. and there were several agencies that were doing so, and there was some suggestion that it had gone through an overseas country like Romania, I think, or somewhere like that.
Right.
It was quite complicated, but the South Australian Supreme Court, in a case involving, I think, a conspiracy to murder, dealt with the matter first, and Justice Kimber there decided that it was admissible because it didn't contravene the definition of what an actual intercept was, because of when you press send, it didn't go to the receiver, it went to the police.
Ah, okay.
And
that's
so it was
an
very
interesting
technical, and that's a very, very simplistic explanation. But the accused then appealed. It went to a 3-court bench who upheld Justice Kimber's decision that it wasn't an intercept, and now it's gone to the High Court. In the meantime, Mark Dreyfus, our Attorney General, decided that he'd put through legislation declaring that that particular function, that platform, what the Anam phone did, was not an intercept.
Right.
And that's created a possible constitutional problem, because it raises the separation of powers and what the courts are there to do and what the High Court is there to do, to interpret the laws as they apply and the definitions as they apply. And an interesting question which will now arise is, has the Attorney General usurped the functions of the court and basically denied the operation of the separation of powers, of which there are 3. The Parliament makes the laws, the Executive enforces the laws, and the Judiciary interprets the laws.
Okay, that is going to be interesting. So when are we looking at a decision coming back about that?
We're looking at, I think it'll probably get to the High Court between June and August sometime.
And there's a lot of people, because there's some large numbers of people that were charged flowing on from that, so high stakes.
A lot of political pressure out there, I think, Gary. I'm being practical.
Yeah, I would imagine. It's well, I'll stay tuned. I might get you back on after that.
It's a really interesting.
It is interesting
matter.
Because if you're making legislation and make it all, well, it's retrospective, isn't it? It's capturing something from the past.
And you'd agree. The interesting part about your former job and my current job is that it's all about how society works. Yeah. From the underbelly to the very top.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got to say, from an ex-detective's point of view, I thought it was a great plan. When I heard about it, I'm thinking, damn it, why didn't I think about something like that? It's simplistic in the planning, but very complicated in the actual getting it up and running. And I'm surprised, and I can talk like this because I'm not involved in it, but I'm surprised it didn't get out. Like, there would have been a lot of people that knew about it.
It started to get out because someone realised there was a leak at the end of it and it was going straight to the police.
Right, and that's where it...
But it's my turn to object.
Okay.
It's my turn to object. In criminal law, and I think in life, there's a saying which a lot of people don't get, that better that 99 guilty men go free than one innocent man be wrongly convicted. Yeah. And it's the chance of using these mechanisms, these platforms, these things, or creating a case against a person wrongly, that puts in a position where people are wrongly convicted. And I say to people who say this to me, do you really care about these people? And how can you act for criminals? And all this sort of stuff. And I say, well, hang on a sec. We've got a system that should be fair, should be reasonable, and it shouldn't be Adam and Eve and giving them the apple again to commit a mortal sin, because you might drag in an innocent person, and that innocent. And I say, do you want your son to be that innocent person and do 20 years?
Yeah, and you can't argue with that that saying. I might have in the old days. I'm not going to not going to now. But yeah, I do understand what you're saying, and there needs to be checks and balances.
Exactly right.
And to make the system work. But that's going to be fascinating how that comes across, because this is a real test. This is the High Court. This is making the big decisions. So. And
it's not just lawyers being nerdy. It really has impact.
Look, I in regards, and I always make comments about lawyers and solicitors and whatnot, I do understand the need for proper defence, and I I take issue with some people that I think cross the line, as you would take issue with where you think police have crossed the line. I've seen come up against some lawyers. I just think no, that's stooping too low. What they've done there, and it might be just the way that they're cross-examining someone or the way that they're playing. But we do need the checks and balances, so I think we're on a agreement there. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I have now seen it, and I keep saying it because it did change my perspective, like having the full weight of the state coming after you. And I know when I was going to court, I was thinking, well, that the worst that's going to happen to me, I might get a fine or something like that. I can't imagine the impact that it would have on you if the consequences were... when this jury comes back or this judge comes back, that could dictate the rest of your life. Like, it's high stakes.
But the law doesn't always work in favour of the accused. It also works in favour of people down the track in terms of how evidence is considered and recrafted. For instance, in the Hey Dad case, where Hughes was charged with a multiplicity of terrible child sexual assault offences, that changed the tendency law, so that a lot more material can come in now if you've got a tendency to do that, and that can be established. So that's in favour of the person who's saying, those people who say, well, but he did this and he did that, why wasn't that raised? Well, now things like that can be raised.
Now it can be raised.
It's called tendency.
Yeah, well, I was involved through campaigning with the Bowraville community on the double jeopardy legislation. It hasn't changed the landscape, and I don't think there's any. I don't think there's been a situation where someone's been convicted. And what I'm talking about there is that if someone was acquitted of a crime, they couldn't be retried until the double jeopardy legislation was changed. Now, fresh and compelling evidence, and it's in the interest of justice. The fact that it's sitting there, I think, is a good thing, because I would hate to have someone, and what it potentially could have been, someone that acquitted of a murder could walk out of court and go, well, I got away with that, and we could never recharge. So the fact that legislation is sitting there, hasn't been implemented, I think is a good thing. But I've always been on about legislation or the justice system, and I get your thoughts on it. The justice system is set up to serve the community that it's there for. And if adjustments if it's not serving the community, legislation needs to be changed. Are you an advocate for changing legislation where it needs to be changed, or is it more old school? No, well, we've been doing this for 200 years. Why change?
No, I hear what you say, and what I don't like is knee-jerk legislative change, where you get change for the sake of satisfying some particular publicity agenda. And then you end up with victims of that agenda who are wrongly convicted or wrongly accused. And we find that the law is then used to assist politicians in their electoral cycle.
Well, you talk about changing the law agendas and the media interest and all that. The bail laws on youth crime and bail laws, I know there's been a lot of talk about that, but I think you articulated very well that quite often it's changed for a political agenda, and it doesn't always work, and innocent people can be caught up in it.
That's because we live in a reactive rather than proactive society. We're reacting to what we see as being a problem, and we're chastising and punishing those who are involved in perpetrating those problems, but we're not going back in the way that we were talking about how jails are changing, Gary, and saying, how can we stop young Indigenous kids from running riot in Alice Springs? How can we stop them before they leave home to go and run riot? And how can we stop kids in Sydney or in Melbourne and in the poorer parts going out and creating havoc and getting into postcode gangs or getting into whatever it is? We've got to look at those aspects, and we've got to put our resources into stopping crime before it starts.
Diversionary plans. You talked about keeping someone in custody. It costs $150,000 a year to keep a person in custody. When you look at the expense that is spent there, had Tim Watson-Munro, a criminal psychologist, on, and he made the point that for $150,000 you could have each inmate with their own personal psychologist looking after them to keep them on the straight and narrow. It's a huge amount, and I know there are people that we need to protect society from. I've got no problems, and there needs to be deterrence, there needs to be punishments, all the things that you talked about that get taken into with sentencing.
Well,
But
Tim, being a psychologist, would say that I might say spend $150,000 on a good lawyer.
here we go. And look, Greg, we got to be honest here. If we if we solve all the solutions of crime, you're going to be out of business.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen, Gary. But I think we're entitled as members of a great democracy to have a system that's fair and that's reasonable, and we get it right as many times as is possible within a fallible system.
Yeah.
And all systems are fallible, but I think we do okay here.
Okay. Let's talk other clients that you've had, and if I mention someone and you're not comfortable talking about it, but got a lot of media publicity, so we're not talking out of school, but John Ibrahim's girlfriend, Sarah Budge, that was charged with the possession of the firearm.
Yes. Decent, lovely girl, Sarah.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of time for Sarah Budge, and now she's John's wife. A really, really decent gal, as you might say.
Yeah.
That was an interesting case. I was part of a really, really good team of lawyers, and had a fair jury who came back with the right decision.
Yeah, yeah. And that people that haven't heard about it, there was a firearm found at the premises, and it was. What was the actual charge? The charge was possession of an unlicensed pistol. Yeah, yeah.
Which I think can carry up to 14 years in jail. Guns are something we take seriously in our community, and rightly so, as you'd recall.
Yeah.
And you'd agree with that. It was the prosecution couldn't establish that she had knowledge that was there or even put it there or knew.
Okay.
And given that other people had access to her apartment, I thought that was the right decision.
An element of doubt there.
Absolutely.
Another high-profile person that you've represented was Scott Miller, the former, and I think it's a sad case, and I know at sentencing you were addressing the issues that created that situation. For those that don't know Scott Miller, he was a silver medalist at the Olympics, a swimmer, and got involved in drugs.
You should, when you say silver medalist, you've got to put that in context, Gary.
Yeah.
He should have been the gold medalist.
Right.
He was the fastest butterfly swimmer on top of the water.
Right.
Now, if anyone knows anything about swimming, and you dive into a 25-metre pool or a 50-metre pool, you go 15 metres and you look up and there's all these flags. There's a big string of flags across. Yeah. You've got to be surfaced by then.
Right.
His nemesis was a guy called Denis Pankratov, a Russian.
Oh, bloody Russians again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And he was invading the swimming pool.
Yeah.
And he was spending probably 60% of the time that he swam the butterfly under the water doing a dolphin kick. So it wasn't butterfly at all. But strangely enough, you can swim faster underwater than you can by breaking the surface on top of the water. And he came up probably a body length in front of Scott in the 1960 Olympics. And he beat Scott to the wall by, a bee's knees.
Right. Well, I didn't think we were going to dissect the.
And Scotty they then changed the rules after that.
Right.
And so Scott's had that. He's an also-ran. You don't win the gold.
No. Well, that's yeah. Okay, I didn't realise the backstory to it. Okay, so you've gone in depth there.
And then he got injured coming up to the Sydney Olympics, which was every
dream,
every sportsman's dream who was in Olympic class sporting events. Missed out on that. Tried to come back for 204, and injuries put him out. But then found himself, like a lot of swimmers do, suffering what we call post-elite sportsman's depression. You go for, and swimming's, you follow the black line. You're in your own world.
The training regime.
And then you come out of this bubble into the limelight, and you're some hero, and you've got to deal with that with no training for it.
Yeah, yeah. No,
it's a sad story.
It is a sad story. How did you come to be representing him?
Because just through associations and through his wife.
Yep.
And through my associations with other people involved in swimming, got to know Scott and looked after him.
You see a lot of elite sportsmen that have had the highs and then struggle after it. But it plays out in rugby league for a lot of different reasons. But you see a lot it happen with a lot of sportsmen.
I think rugby league is a sort of different category.
Yeah,
it's young men weekly being involved in this glamorous, high-profile, adulation type sport.
Yeah,
and there's cocaine around, and there's good-looking girls at clubs and so forth, and it's not the same sort of.
The isolation of a
swimmer.
Yeah,
and you look at a lot of our swimmers have had. Liesl Jones had problems. Who's the long distance swimmer?
Not Kieran Perkins.
After Kieran,
Grant
Hackett had problems.
That's right.
And so, Scotty is not alone.
Yeah.
He was just one that fell further than others.
Yeah.
It's, as I said, it's a sad story.
And representing him, you obviously the way that you relay the story, you felt it personally, the responsibility of representing him.
Oh yeah, he's. People commit crime, but doesn't stop them from being human beings. And you can set the crime aside. Sometimes you've got a really decent human being there who's made a lot of bad mistakes, but you can't throw the good person out with the bathwater.
Another person that you've come across in your career, and we're going back into the dark world of King's Cross, but Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, who was, by way of introduction, people probably have heard her name, but Warren Lanfranchi's girlfriend at the time that he was shot and killed by Roger Rogerson, and was sort of considered she might have been an informant giving information, but she ended up being murdered.
Her body was found in one of the Centennial Park lakes. And
she was, at the time, she was vocal in speaking up about police corruption.
Well, she was speaking up to the extent that she believed that that Roger Rogerson had killed Warren in cold blood. And there's all sorts of different stories about that. But she was a victim of a time when collusion, I think, between people in positions of relative power, either from the criminal milieu or from the police milieu, were bound to catch up with her.
Yeah. And how did you find her as a person?
We didn't. I think we may have acted for her when I was in a practice out at Bondi Junction with one of my older partners, who is now deceased as well. We acted for her just on some minor things, I think, but we got more caught up in that aspect of it because we were alleged to have had her diaries in my office, and my office was then broken into, and we nothing of value taken, except there was a nice neatly cut section of our roof.
Sorry, so break this down. Just my detective mind's thinking, hold it. So the information was that you had Sally's diaries.
Well, that was a rumour that was out there, and that had come through another girlfriend of hers for whom we acted.
Right.
And it was thought that had been left in our care.
And that could be very damaging for certain people, one would assume.
We didn't have it. We didn't even have a safe. And in fact, when people were paying with cheques, they were stuck in a jar on the top of a filing cabinet. Well, they were all still there, but there was a precisely cut hole in our roof. And they got through the roof and through the ceiling, and there was clearly all our filing cabinets had been rifled.
You can't make this stuff up, Greg. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, I hadn't realised that. Just thinking about that. Okay, that's interesting. The diaries. Wow. Good. What do you think makes a good solicitor? I haven't forgotten about the saying. Have you ever met? And I'll exclude myself from this question. Have you ever met a good detective? But before I do, what do you consider is the good traits of a defence solicitor?
Be a good listener.
Yep.
Be compassionate, and be prepared to look at the case from every available angle, and to do your best by your client, and be truthful to your client.
Good advice. Did you have mentors in throughout your career, or people that you learnt from?
I had different barristers who I worked with.
Yep.
I had the benefit of working with some great lawyers and being opposed by some great lawyers, a lot of whom became really good judges. And if law is a really rewarding place because you sort of feel like you're doing good. You feel like you've not done. You can be critical too much sometimes, but no, I generally had the benefit of working with good barristers and with people who were really, really smart.
Do you have barristers that you... is it Forbes Chambers that you engage with a lot of barristers from Forbes Chambers?
Yeah, I regard Forbes as probably the premier criminal chambers, but across the board there's...
Yeah, I used to hate walking up there to serve a brief at Forbes Chambers.
But
Okay.
across the span of barristers, Samuel Griffith have got some very good barristers, and there's some other chambers spread around where they're lots of good barristers.
And what's the working relationship with the solicitor and the barrister? Like, what's the dynamics there?
Well, I've always regarded myself as anything but a bag carrier. Yeah. I say jokingly, I'm only carrying the bags today, which is good. I'm still getting paid and not doing any of the work. Yeah. But I tell my clients that they're in a two-horse race.
Yeah.
I says there's the prosecution and there's us.
Yeah.
I say, I'm the trainer, the barrister's the jockey, and you know what you are? You're a horse.
Okay.
So if you don't run across the line first, you're in big trouble.
I haven't heard that description. Break that down again. Run it past me again so I don't forget it.
I say, the solicitor's the trainer.
Yeah.
The barrister's the jockey.
Yeah.
But the client's the horse.
Okay.
It's a good analogy because if the horse doesn't run across the line first, the jockey and the trainer walk away. They go home.
Yeah. Okay, that's not a
still
bad
get
way.
paid.
Not a bad way of describing it. Policing. Have you seen? You've been in as a defence solicitor for 40 years, so you've seen changes in police. Like you wouldn't even recognise what policing was in the 80s, early 80s, compared to what it is now. What do you think the quality of investigations are like?
I think the quality of investigations has improved markedly.
Yep.
I think that's because I came into law on the cusp of a change where we'd gone through that period where there were suggestions of corruption and so forth, and police were prepared to make up conversations that they'd had with suspects, which we called verbals, in order to gain a conviction. So they were working more on gut instinct than they were on real hard work.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
And I think to the credit of the police force, that's greatly improved.
Yes.
And with the advances that we've had in what I talked about earlier about forensic technologies, which is listening devices and telephone intercepts, better surveillance, long-range cameras and long-range, and basically putting in the time to act on. Well, you start off with a suspicion, and then work your way through to look at how things work, and whether you've got something that's just a spin-off. And a lot of the major busts that have been achieved by police is by just looking at that spin-off. Is there something here? This person's met that person. We're going to have a look at what he's doing.
It's definitely an evolving and changing landscape for criminal investigation. A good detective you've come up against in your career? Someone, because there's been some ding-dong battles in the courts and over time. Is there one that you could say that you respected for the way he or she went about their job? Well,
in terms of just dogged determination, I'd have to talk about Justin Murray. I've actually got Justin in a case now, but Justin was the officer in charge of the investigations into the armour guard robberies.
Yep.
Across the pavement armour guard robberies when I think Chubb and armour guard security trucks were being attacked as they stopped to fill up ATMs and so forth. And I think overall 7.1 million or $7.6 million was stolen by the police.
Yeah.
Stolen by. Sorry,
so
not by the police.
I was going to. I said yep and go. Okay.
No,
where are we going
was
here?
stolen by.
Make sure we're recording this.
It was
This is going to
stolen
be
by
interesting.
the alleged crooks.
Okay, we
crooks.
won't highlight that.
The alleged
Greg,
crooks.
there's your headline in the paper. Okay.
I made the mistake in court last week. Of referring to one of my clients as a graffiti artist. Well, the magistrate went ballistic and criticised me for that. And I was trying to get in. Well, I'll rephrase that and say he was an exponent. But no, it wasn't the police. And we eventually won that case, 161 charges to nil.
Right. Okay.
Which was a great success. Justin, to his I won't say to his credit, but he was so convinced of their guilt that he tracked down everyone and got them all for something else.
Right. Okay. Well, I like that type of doggedness.
That was real doggedness. Yeah. And look, I've met a lot of police officers, but who now being armed with the technology and the ability to track crime, do an amazing job. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it takes the pressure off to a degree as a police officer that you can rely on the technology and that, because before, I won't say before, but there was a lot of hard graft. You had to get the statements, and then you've got a brief that's not. Yeah, there would be. I'm saying here just from my thoughts. There seemed to be a lot more trials because you didn't have that evidence. You didn't have the technical evidence or the phone records or things that could back it up. So it came down to witness testimony, which you'd know, and I'm sure you've exploited it in a fair way. That eyewitness testimony is not always that reliable.
Nor is memory.
Yeah,
and psychologists will tell you that constructed memory can be really fallible, but. It's then up to the jury to decide whether they believe it or not, and that itself is a fallible system.
Yeah,
we saw that with George Pell, and a lot of people would have their views on that. But knowing, from my point of view, looking at what the High Court said, I think the jury did make a mistake. Other minds would differ. Also, seeing bishops come to Catholic churches and know how many people they drag with them, and they're never alone. I thought it was pretty difficult, but. You've got to look at the system and look at the fallibilities and say, well, the police are getting better tools these days to take suspicion to the point of proof. And that's and even though I'm a criminal defence lawyer, I'm a member of a society as well. And in that respect, I expect prosecutors to do their job properly and as hard. I don't expect to cut me any slack because I'm paying them to do their job. Yeah. And so, police are getting better resources, and that's to our advantage. What
about the court system? Is there things that you think could be improved? And you said, I think in part one, that you believe the system we've got is as good as any other system across the world.
I think what needs to be improved in our court system is not the system of the determination of guilt or the application of court time when you've got judges and juries and magistrates actually doing the sentencing jobs or doing the trial jobs. The problem we've got is we're overburdened with administrative stuff. I was in a court the other day out at Campbelltown, and the magistrate had to deal with 150 matters in his list. And these were all serious matters. Yes. And the majority of them, Gary, were matters that could have been done by a registrar. They were just adjourning matters because they weren't ready to proceed. Now, we're paying big money to have a judicial officer sit there and do an administrative job. And so there are ways and means of cleaning up that system which would save money and I think expedite the system as well.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there, because the time that appears to be wasted in court going through what you've just described is, it's
what
out
we
of
call
control.
the mentions.
Oh, the mentions, sit there. What's the court on at Downing Centre where they have the mentions and you've virtually got to fight your way in to get in there?
Oh, that's the Registrar's Court 4.4.
Yeah.
But they get through the mentions really quickly. By 11:30, it's all over and done with.
Yeah. But it's can put you
But
to sleep
sometimes
in
you've
there
got you've got in the custody courts. It's all dealt with by a magistrate.
Yeah.
And the magistrates are basically just shuffling paper and adjourning matters. And sometimes you've got to go before a magistrate.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in the Supreme Court, we have registrars who do a lot of that work, and unless there's an issue that needs determination by a judge, which is just not shifting the dates or saying this has got to be filed in time, you're going to get referred to a judge. It doesn't happen in the local courts and sometimes in the district courts.
What would you say when I throw this to you, that an inquisitorial system is better than an adversarial system? Why? Because You talked about going into the Royal Commission, which is more of an inquisitorial type system, inquest, and as compared to an adversarial system. Do you think there's any value in leaning to more towards an inquisitorial system rather than an adversarial system?
Not while we are entitled to the right to silence.
Okay, that's a stickler for it.
Yeah, and proof beyond reasonable doubt. And I think that's, if you're going to take away a person's liberty, and we were talking about jails before, that people don't understand is that every day you and I can get up and we have a choice as to what we do. Now, choices are limited because life's repetitive, but we don't have to go to work if we don't really want to. We can take a sickie.
Yeah.
We get our 4 weeks holiday. At the end of the day, we can go and have a beer with our mates. But if you get up and you put on your green shorts and your T-shirt and you know exactly what you're going to be doing for the rest of the day and the next 4 or 5 or 10 years, that's not liberty.
Okay. Look, I agree with you. And to understand the punishment has been taken away from society, and it's not a nice place to be in prison. And even the prisoners acknowledge that some people have to be in there. Yeah, they're not saying that everyone, we should open the jail gates. They know that people should be in there. What about the jury system? I've had a problem sometimes throughout my career with where there's a voir dire and the jury's excluded because there's evidence that it might be prejudicial if the jury hears it. The problem I have is that we select a jury that our peers to judge the person's guilt or innocent based on all the information available. We're saying the jury have got the skill set, the life experience to form a view, and then the jury are excluded from so much information that I think is relevant. And perhaps we've got to give them the benefit of the doubt that they can interpret the weight that should be placed on that evidence.
Well, that comes back to what I was saying about the hey dad tendency aspect of evidence, where there's other like events that this person has perpetrated, and then the jury used to, in some respects, and still don't hear that all the time. Yeah. But there are rules of evidence which are there to protect the person who is entitled to a fair trial. And as I said before, no system is fallible, and that is always up for reassessment and for change. The laws of evidence are constantly changing and constantly being refined, and you can have faith in the fact that if there's a problem, that law reform commissions are looking at those and trying to make things better. Now, from my point of view, they don't always make them better. And there's been a very, very substantial drift in the criminal law to taking for granted what the victim says as being true and not being able to challenge the victim, particularly in sexual assault cases. I have a certain view about that. The Me Too movement has a totally different view. So you've got to accept what a person says as being gospel. Well, sorry, but there's as many truths come out of a person's mouth as lies do as well, and you should have the opportunity, if you're an accused person, to test the evidence that's being given against you. So I think adversarial systems in that respect are the way to go. Okay,
fair comment. Would you? I see young solicitors, especially. I saw them more with the DPP, but I saw it with defence as well. Always seem to be overworked, underpaid and stressed. It looks like a tough career, but I also see people like yourself that have spent a lifetime in the career, and I can tell that you've enjoyed your career, and you think it's a worthwhile vocation. Would you recommend law to people?
Strangely, I tell people some young kid comes up to me, or a parent comes up to me and says, "Oh, Greg, I think Johnny should go into law?" I say, "Listen, doesn't matter whether it's law or medicine or any profession. Get a job dealing with people's money, not people's problems." But no, look. Professional life as a lawyer is satisfying.
Yeah.
If you understand that it's not going to make you, a billionaire. Yeah. But it's a worthwhile profession if you take it seriously and you're actually helping people.
Yeah. No, well, I see the people, the lawyers that I respect, you can see that they've put in the time. And that might be where they're turning up in the middle of a trial and it's clear they've been up all night, not on the drink, but up all night working on the brief and that type of thing. I think we'll wrap it up at this point in time. I just want to say I've really enjoyed sitting down and having a chat with you. You guys are not as bad as other people are telling me you are.
I'll go away. Enlightened and heartened by that comment, Gary.
No, but you've given a good insight into the world of crime and some funny stories that I think anyone that's spent a career like you have is going to have. And thanks for giving us the opportunity to sit down and have a chat with you.
It's been my pleasure.
Cheers.